Have you ever wondered how an aristocrat with idealistic obsessions ended up founding the most dangerous empire in history? For many Resident Evil fans, Umbrella is synonymous with pharmaceuticals, laboratories, and viruses. But the reality began long before Raccoon City. It began in 1923 with the birth of a man who embraced an extreme Darwinist vision of the world, Oswell E. Spencer. Spencer was no god, nor a misunderstood genius. He was a manipulator, convinced that humanity was flawed, and that someone had to decide who deserved to evolve. And of course, that someone had to be him. Today, on Resident Evil Saga, we're going to tie up all the loose ends to understand how Spencer used the writings of a forgotten explorer to find the Progenitor Virus, and why every one of his decisions was coldly calculated to build his own utopia of absolute power. All this chaos began with a name that almost never receives the weight it deserves: Henry Travis. Henry was an explorer who traveled through Africa for many years, documenting the flora and cultures that the Western world chose to ignore. Among his many findings was a peculiar flower named Sonentrepe, or Stairway to the Sun. Now, according to his records, the Ndipaya tribe would perform rituals using this plant, convinced that surviving its effects was not a spiritual act, but a definitive biological test, the confirmation of superior genetic strength. For the scientific community of that era, these notes were nothing more than superstition and the exaggerations of an obsessive explorer. But Spencer did not interpret them as mere mythology. Together with Edward Ashford and James Marcos, he realized these texts describe something no one else had been able to interpret. It wasn't mysticism or religion, it was the primitive evidence of an agent capable of altering human nature from its very core. In 1966, an expedition, financed through questionable methods and with a completely non-existent ethical framework, arrived at the ruins of the Ndipaya village in West Africa. There, hidden within an underground garden, carefully protected for generations, the three individuals isolated what would ultimately change the world's destiny: the Progenitor Virus. But it's crucial to make one thing absolutely clear from the very beginning: this virus was neither a blessing nor a miraculous formula. In its natural state, it was a brutally lethal retrovirus. Only a truly insignificant fraction of the global population possessed the genetic compatibility required to survive the infection and, in extremely rare instances, to develop enhanced capabilities. There was no magic in this. It was cold, relentless science, a biological filter that mercilessly eliminated the majority. And Spencer saw in that filter the perfect tool to impose his vision of human evolution. This is where Spencer's manipulation becomes evident. He had the objective and the discovery, but lacked the scientific knowledge or the patience to develop it himself. So he did what he knew best. He used others. Ashford provided the fortune and the contacts. Marcos, the scientific talent Spencer never had. He convinced them to establish a pharmaceutical company, operating under the guise of medical research. However, the true objective was to conceal a clandestine program designed to transform the progenitor into a viable and marketable biological weapon. This is how Umbrella Pharmaceuticals came into existence in April of 1968. While the world saw advertisements for common medicines and a seemingly respectable corporation, in the shadows, Spencer authorized increasingly inhumane experiments to reduce the virus's lethality, laying the groundwork for what would later become known as the T-virus. But to truly grasp the full extent of Spencer's chilling ruthlessness, one must look more closely at how he systematically destroyed those he once called his friends. The death of Edward Ashford in 1968 was not a simple laboratory accident. It was a political necessity. Ashford believed in research, but Spencer knew that while Edward was alive, he would never have full control of the company's shares. By eliminating him, Spencer not only inherited a part of the Ashford family's influence, but also sent a silent message to everyone at Umbrella. In his world, no one is indispensable. With James Marcos, the game was much slower and more perverse. Spencer allowed him to continue working for several decades at a training facility located in the Arklay Mountains, which permitted him to perfect the T-virus by combining the Progenitor Virus with the DNA of leeches. Spencer observed from a distance, allowing Marcus to become obsessed and isolate himself from the world. In the year 1988, when Marcus finally achieved his great success, Spencer did not offer him any thanks. He then sent his two most brilliant students, William Birkin and Albert Wesker, to assassinate him and steal every single one of his research notes. Connecting the dots, you come to realize that loyalty within Umbrella was merely a bargaining chip Spencer used to secure his own glory. Even the very architecture of his laboratories reflected his deep-seated paranoia. Spencer didn't just desire secrets, he craved impenetrable fortresses. The tragic case of George Trevor, the architect of the Spencer mansion, stands as the ultimate testament to his cruelty. Trevor poured all his genius into devising a network of riddles and secret passages to safeguard Spencer's discoveries, but he ultimately became yet another victim of his own making. Spencer couldn't allow anyone to know the blueprints of his castle, so he locked up the Trevor family, condemning them to a truly tragic fate. For Spencer, art, science, and human life were nothing more than simple, disposable tools. This corruption network reached the highest echelons of government. While citizens viewed Umbrella as a symbol of progress, Spencer was actively buying off politicians and high-ranking military officials, offering them the enticing dream of creating invulnerable soldiers. This is the true and underlying reason why, despite the constant biological incidents, no one dared to challenge or even touch the corporation for many years. Spencer didn't merely aspire to be the architect of a new race, he sought to become the absolute master of justice itself. Spencer's method for achieving his ultimate sinister goal was as meticulously systematic as it was utterly cruel. Connecting the dots, it becomes perfectly clear why the Wesker project was originally conceived. Spencer never expected to find naturally gifted individuals, he ultimately decided to manufacture them himself. Children whose parents were deemed genetically exceptional were abducted, raised in clandestine facilities, indoctrinated with a profoundly distorted worldview, and ultimately infected with controlled variants of the progenitor. The objective was not to rescue them or transform them into heroes, but to validate their ideology, even if it meant sacrificing the lives of nearly every single one of them. Among the very few survivors who remained were Albert and Alex Wesker. What had initially begun as the arrogant, self-serving dream of an aristocrat who was absolutely convinced of his own inherent superiority ultimately culminated in the most profound and terrifying monstrosity ever recorded in fictional history. Umbrella Corporation grew to become a vast global empire, but its true origin was never rooted in medicine or progress, but rather the singular obsession of one man, utterly unable to accept the limits of his own humanity. Years after his corporation's downfall, Spencer ended up alone, paranoid, and clinging to the idea that he could still transcend. In 2006, in his isolated castle, he confronted Albert Wesker, the most successful and lethal product of his own experiments, who definitively took his life. The ultimate irony is truly impossible to ignore. The man who had desired to become the architect of a new race died, realizing that ultimately he was never a god, just another mortal, utterly crushed by his own ambition.